So there's a certain point where you may start to realize how incredibly simple this is. How it might seem to sound intelligent or, I don't know, hard to understand at some point, but um it's really just challenging the understanding that we've already sort of built up without even remembering. And not even that, because we didn't do that in the past, but that we know by feeling when we are bringing that um, as conflict into our now. So the idea of possession is very interesting to sort of like look at, because possession comes in when there's a knower. And so the knower knows. It possesses its knowledge. It believes that it possesses its knowledge, and it believes that it possesses a bunch of other things. So, before we can have the idea that we can possess anything, we first have to identify. So, what does identify really mean? Well, we have the use of the word identify as to know what something is. So I have identified this plant in front of me, and it is a wild blueberry. So I know what it is. It's a wild blueberry. So I looked up the etymology of identify, and it's interesting because it started out in the 1640s, meaning this, like I identified that this plant is the same as, in my book, the wild blueberry. So these leaves are the same. So 1640s, identify means regard as the same. Sense of determine the identity of, recognize, or prove to be the same, first recorded 1769, meaning make one with, associate oneself, regard oneself as being the essence of, is from 1780s. So that we know what we are. In order for us to identify something, there has to be two. So here's non-duality, not two, coming into play here. So this blueberry is the same as this blueberry in my book. I've identified it. This concept of blueberry, it matches. And so when we identify ourselves, there are two of us instantly. In order for us to know what we are, there have to be two of us, one that recognizes it as the same. So, etymology for the win again. So, in order to possess something, there has to be the possessor. It is interesting in religion that there's fear of possession by spiritual entities or demons or whatnot, when in reality, the idea that our psyches are closed and that there's other forces that can assert themselves on it is the idea of possession. So the idea that there are things that we can possess and things that we do not possess, that creates the window for a sense of being unsatisfied. I'm unsatisfied with what I have, and I want what I do not have. And immediately, if I identify as the one who has these things, has this body, then the vast majority of the world is not actually mine. So, in our direct experience, we can't actually possess anything. It's like living in an old house. You have, like, everybody who's lived there has left a mark there. The flower gardens are, maybe even like the last person didn't plant all the flowers, but they've been like generations of flowers and plants have been added to it. And all you are is the caretaker of it. Well, instantly, in this moment, all you are is the observer of it. This tree here, like, I know that this land is owned by whatever, whomever, whatever group. But right now, I am aware of this tree. You could say I'm experiencing this tree. So every car, every house, our body, everything is actually experienced. Now, of course, the concept of possession is helpful. It's helpful in the world. But when it comes to suffering, it's a good foundational belief that pops up right after identification. The belief that we can possess things to question. So some traditions talk about renunciation, and there's been a lot of confusion in religions about whether or not one should give away their possessions or give away everything, and have very little, or be a minimalist, or give everything to God. You already instantly are giving everything to God. You already can't possess anything. And so, like, all these greed and jealousy and feelings of shame, even possessing a mental illness, possessing anxiety, possessing a problem, all come up based on this idea that we are a thing that can then have things. So we can try to obtain things. We can be jealous of other people we believe have what we are missing, or we can try to rid ourselves of things. So when we speak, we often say, I have anxiety, I have hypothyroidism, I have, and it is helpful to have a knowledge, like the identification of a wild blueberry. It's helpful to know that this is a wild blueberry because I can come back here when the wild blueberries are in season and pick some wild blueberries, possibly. And it's helpful to have certain diagnoses because then we can drop some of the concern about not knowing what something is. So if you get really, really sick and you have no idea what's causing it, you don't know if it's a chronic illness or whatever else, and you go to the doctor and they test you and you have the flu, then you can go online and you can make some soups and broths and have ginger and lemon and all these amazing foods that help fight the flu. You know what you have, and then you are aligned with the action that you want for your healing. So in some ways, identifying, knowing what something is a very healing thing. But when we say we have it as a burden and we try to get rid of it, it doesn't work, because when we think something and then think about getting rid of it, we're actually drawing it into our experience. It's just that direct. So recognition is true identification. So I'm borrowing this word of recognition. So what does it mean to recognize oneself? Again, it takes two, but stick with me here. So love is known by how it feels. So alignment, knowing oneself, is felt to be this expansive, open, accepting, whatever descriptive words that point. Love is known by how it feels, as devoid of thoughts that are sort of like holding the cork down, that are saying, what I want isn't here, I have this problem, I have this tension, I don't have enlightenment, other people have enlightenment, I have an ego. an ego, in order to have an ego, you must have a separate sense of self. So it's that you already don't have an ego, but it seems as if thoughts arise as if there's a separate self that can possess things and can possess problems and can try to possess other people, jealousy, all of these things. And when we directly feel jealousy or feel those emotions, we find that it is already pure. But we miss it in the identification. So identification, possession, and belief all kind of come together. So in meditation, when a thought comes up that says, I can't sit here, I can't meditate anymore, we believe that that this thought is then referring back to that I, and that we are that I, and that thought feels so bad because directly that feeling is saying, no, this isn't, and then the belief is what causes us to get up and not sit again and then tell everybody that we can't meditate or we're bad meditators. So it's thought, possession of thought. So the thinker possesses the thoughts. You don't actually possess your thoughts. And believing your thoughts is the possession. So believing that you possess thoughts is the belief. And here's another example of how trying to rid oneself. So like Alan Watts would talk about the desire to be rid of desire as a desire. So then like trying to rid oneself of the ego and trying to rid oneself of a problem, which we cannot do because every time we think I problem, we've actually identified as the same as, and brought it into our now awareness, and that we're believing that. So you can't ever fight against things. You can't exclude things. So if someone were to have some conversations with people and they find these conversations very unsatisfying, and they think and disregard the discord of feeling bad, and then they believe that they're not being respected or something else, then they try to cut off that relationship. Or they say, I'm not talking to people anymore. I'm a cat lady. I'm only going to talk to my cats now, cats and plants. And when I was younger, I was tempted to do this. Just like, okay, I'm done with people. I'm done talking. I'm not talking anymore. I'm not sharing who I am anymore. I'm done with this. There's no self there. What's actually going on is so super direct that those thoughts that this was a bad experience, I'm done with this, like I'm solving this problem now, I'm getting rid of these people in my life, I'm cutting them off, I'm done with this. I'm not talking anymore, I'm shutting up. Wise people don't say anything. What this is those thoughts are, when we're thinking, it's like there's two of us. Like there's someone saying something and someone listening. It's like a conversation or something. And those thoughts are actually the thoughts that we want to drop. And so we don't actually want to shut up and stop having conversations and relationships. We want to stop believing and stop the talking that very moment and recognize the love that we are unconditionally already without needing anybody else's acceptance. So the belief in possession and the belief in doing, that there is a one who does, are very tied together. And this is why we're attracting everything. Awareness is always attracting. It's not a body, it's not identified with a body that is a material thing that goes out into the world, travels, and obtains and finds other things, and then brings them back or whatever to a location that is home. We're always attracting. And so doing and the idea of possession go hand in hand, but what are some things that you can do, which isn't actually doing, but more of a coming back home, which doesn't involve any travel, to realize that or recognize that there's no possession. So appreciation, realizing that you can walk by the most beautiful property, the most beautiful gardens, the most beautiful landscaping, and appreciate it. And that's what you're here for, rather than always thinking about, well, my yard doesn't look that good, and I want to be that rich someday, but I don't believe I will be, or whatever. We have all kinds of ideas of desires that aren't actually really desires, but they're a bunch of things that we've sort of like noted down in our head somewhere that are things that we do not have. Because when you believe in possession, you possess a very, very tiny, tiny amount of the world. So appreciating, recognizing, like, in the present moment, for awareness, for whatever term you like, that everything already is. The sky, the moon, just nature, again, is just such an amazing teacher, because it's, sure, we can pick the wild blueberries or whatever and identify them, but it so lends itself to everybody enjoying it. So enjoy, appreciate these things that we cannot claim. And the other thing is to hone into your intuition. And so often when we're like walking or going somewhere, or we have this idea of a timeline or a schedule or something like that in our head, or an intention for where we're going and what we're doing, what you'll find if you look for it is that sometimes you get an impulse to break that routine, to like go somewhere else. And you can even go for a walk sometime when you don't have to go anywhere, and just like see where you are pulled to go. Or go into the supermarket and go into the produce section, and forgetting all your ideas about nutrition and what foods you like and what foods you've tried and haven't tried and what foods you believe are healthy and whatever else. Just go to what you're drawn to and buy it. And what you find is that the world opens up to you, and we sort of like invite in the sort of like feeling, or we're sort of like open to being gifted with knowledge, or just something that you may have wanted. And what you realize is that this is all for you. And you realize that you are so utterly worthy, beyond the idea of like what you have or don't have or what's titled to your name, that there's just this love and worthiness that is prior to that. So the possessor is the possessed. And enlightenment isn't something that you can possess. It is not an attainment. It's not an attainment for somebody. Just like the ego isn't something we can get rid of, isn't something a separate self can have or cannot have. There is directly known as awareness. There is emotion, and there is what we call suffering, which is perpetuated in a belief or a resistance to that guidance, a resistance to realizing that the emotion in its essence is the sensation, is the awareness that it's made up of. And not a knowing and that repressing it and feeling it, but a recognizing it. Love is known by how it feels. Love it only recognizes itself, and this is exactly why we have those negative emotions, is that it wants to recognize itself, it wants to purify itself, but we can't try to possess the idea of being pure. We can't possess the idea of being enlightened. And that's why if we think that we're enlightened, or we're trying to be enlightened, or we think we know better than to feel jealousy, or we're too spiritually evolved to feel jealousy, or to feel anger, or to feel any of these things, then what we're doing is we're just continually trying to exclude them from our experience, not seeing that the direct sensation of all emotions is already that feeling love, and then recognizing it there. So there is no enlightenment, is not an attainment, and the possessor is the possessed.